Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Arawana Hayashi. So Arawana I've known for a few years, though I haven't met in person for a while. She has a really strong background in mostly in dance, but also in meditation, the Shambhala traditions. And she's trained in a kind of wide variety of traditions, from sort of improv to Japanese court dance. And she's known also for collaborating with Otto Scharmer, who founded Theory U and the social presencing theatre. So, Arawana, I never quite know how to describe you to people, because you're something of a beautiful enigma, and I hope that was okay.
Thank you, Mark. That was a description, and I don't think I've ever been called an enigma, so that that will be something to ponder.
Okay, and let's start at the beginning. How did you get interested in the body? What was the beginning of your journey?
Oh gosh, Mark, I was put in dance classes when I was 5.
Wow.
I think because I like to move around and dance around, and had an interest in musicality in general. And then really was trained primarily in the ballet until I was about 16. And then when I really wanted to go in that direction career-wise, my parents really stepped in and said, that's definitely not going to happen. That's an inappropriate line of work, and I would be better suited as a librarian or a dietitian or something, and which I did. I went on and went to graduate school in library science. But I started up dancing again then in college, and to contemporary dance, and then really didn't stop after that. So I've been dancing, and also when I reflect, there was a lot about dance, and particularly the study of dancing, which had to do with how to work with, just confusion of being a person. Okay. And how the engaging in a physical discipline was so healing and healthy for me. And then later became, in the late 60s, early 70s, I was practicing yoga and Tai Chi Chuan and those kinds of things. And again, the movement was so grounding, and it had a lot to do with just being present no matter what was going on in my life, which was relatively chaotic at the time. So I think dance has been both an art form for me, a creative process, but it's also just a mind-body a healthy thing to do. So a variety of things have kept me at it for all these years now. It's nearly 70 years I've been dancing, so that's quite a long time.
Wow. And just to place this, I didn't realize it's 70 years. Wow.
I'm 74, Mark. So, 74. And I started dancing at 5, so I've had a long career.
Yeah. Okay. So you had that. I didn't know you had that classical ballet background. And then place this for listeners, then, because we have listeners around the world. Is this United States, East Coast, West Coast? Give us some sense of the geography here.
I grew up in the Midwest, Mark.
In the Midwest?
In Ohio.
Okay.
My father is already is Japanese American, born in Hawaii.
Uh-huh.
And my mother was Euro-American, a Midwestern farm family.
Okay.
And I was born during the war, Mark, in 1944. So that's a unique time to be Japanese American in the U.S. And so it was that was my growing up, and then I moved after college to the East Coast, and I've been here ever since.
And you say during the war, I understand then there was internment of Japanese citizens during the war in the States, kind of one of the less pleasant parts of American history. I mean, was there anything your family was involved in, or?
It was not, partially because my father was already in Ohio. Mm-hmm. He did go into the American Army with the Japanese American battalions that fought in Europe, and but we were not interned, no. So I don't know anybody else of my generation, however, who was Japanese American who wasn't. So
right, yeah. That's when you told me your age. Okay, and then meditation. How did that begin? So as I understand it, particularly the Shambhala tradition, you were kind of deeply immersed in.
I took an interest in this in the early 1970s. I kind of thought I would be interested in Zen. And then I met my own teacher who was Tibetan, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, in 1974. So I've been in that lineage, in that community ever since then. And it's been a very, I don't know what to say, like I grew up there. So I'm it's had its ups and downs in the community. I don't know whether you're aware of that. It's quite going through a very, very, very difficult time right now. Yeah, very difficult.
On retreat with some of Reggie Ray's students last year, and it seemed like there was still pain from some of that era that was there, and there's still things there and things they were really doing that were maybe in response and reaction, and some things they put in place, that were because of some of the scandals or things that had happened. Seemed like it was still very live in some ways.
It's still alive and very painful, Mark, in terms of, how does a tradition like that come to the West that's very centralized, very patriarchal, hierarchical, and how does it fit into today's world, and how does a legacy from the 1970s also fit into today's world? It's a very multi-layered challenge. Yeah.
And many guests talk about these kind of related issues, that whether it's the teachers from the East who were sort of, Aikido teachers or meditation teachers, yoga teachers, who kind of settled here and had the confusions of Western culture and how they fitted in with that, or the culture clashes between Tibetan or Japanese or, whatever culture and America or Britain, wherever it is in the West. And then this new generation growing up and the kind of post generation of the sort of making the stand against kind of abusing teachers or having very different standards of sexual relationships or views on ethnicity, or a lot of these things have really changed. This is quite a lively topic for a lot of guests, whether they're coming from yoga or aikido or wherever tradition. It just seems like there's the same issues across these different traditions.
Yes, I think that this is certainly true, Mark. One of the things for me, just personally, has been the teachings that my original teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, gave on art. So these are so powerful, and on creative process, and on sort of how the goodness of people and groups of people and society itself can be expressed, can be recognized, can be nurtured in some way. And so those teachings on art have been very helpful in, obviously we were taught with calligraphy and object arranging and some theater. Trungpa Rinpoche developed a theater training called Mudra Theater. But I have found that these apply to any group of people, whether they're interested in the arts or not, that learning is a creative process, that innovation is the key word to how we can face the global challenges that we have, as well as local. So I feel a great gratitude for those teachings and the way that they can be applied nowadays to this kind of challenge.
It's interesting, the word innovation used to be associated with, say, the arts, but now you'll hear it in tech sector as an absolute business has to be innovating. And, in terms of global solutions, looking at political issues, it's become this sense, like someone wrote a book called, we're basically saying we're all artists now. You have to be creating. You have to be doing something expressive and original. You just don't stand out in the business world. This was a book on marketing, talking about being an artist. Or Pressfield's, the war on art, which is really war of art, which is just really talking about like how to write a book or how to get anything done and how to be creative in the wider sense. That seems to have become opened up to more and more of us.
It does. And I think also, Mark, that maybe we're going, this is just a premise to think about. Maybe we're going more into, we're going away from the solitary genius leader, creator, and then everybody else follows that model of leadership. much more, of course, toward a distributed, flat kind of how collectively we can address things rather than having this kind of more traditional or older leadership model of the single solitary brilliant artist or creator or leader. That there's more about, like, what we're doing now, we call in this category of social art.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a word that I think Joseph Beuys probably was the first to, or maybe others too, but he used that word, that living on the planet was a social art, and that that it was our collective job to create governance and create care for one another, create culture. So I have a feeling, at least with the people that I hang out with, that this is a real area of exploration and requires skills that many of us don't have, skills of really listening and collaborating well, and letting the genius of the group come to the surface rather than all of the various, the uniqueness of the parts of the individuals, as well as some kind of underlying or holding space that allows us to work collectively.
And how do we
Do you find that? I don't know. Do you find that when you're...
Yes and no. So on the one hand, I definitely see this trend, which is politically driven as much as anything, I think, and this trend towards the communal. One might call it a more feminine approach, communality rather than agency. And I see the benefits of emergent processes in groups sometimes coming up with things that are unique, or like, wow, how did this happen? It happened between us somehow. And I definitely see the benefits of collaboration. I mean, there's things that a team can do that no one individual could ever do, of course. But I want to balance that with kind of almost like a kind of this sense of that a committee never created great art.
Yes.
And almost like a sort of fear of communism for me, like a kind of communalism often seems to involve the suppression of the individual. And I don't see great art coming from, and I see, as well as the wisdom of crowds, I see the bullying of crowds. I see I've seen football crowds or other crowds, just crowds of people online. I just seen things that really are the worst of humanity in a crowd from individuals who are perfectly good individuals. There's a way in which crowds can enslave. So I kind of wonder how one balances those two things. How does that resolve?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good inquiry. And I think those of us that work with groups, it's a question of what kind of container does one create so that the best of a person and a group of people come forward, which is really what most, in a funny way, with Presencing Institute, is most of what our work is. How do you create kind of spaces where, when people get together and they can have widely, different stakeholder views and agendas and values, how do you set up spaces, and what kind of processes do we use to encourage or invite the collective sanity and healthiness and care for the planet to come forth, rather than these things that you're describing, where people get just swept along into really painful and destructive thoughts and behaviors. I mean, that would be a kind of definition, I think, of Presencing Institute's work.
Yeah, let's come to that. So on the shelf behind you, I can see two books that say Theory. Two big books there. Otto Scharmer, he's kind of a famous guy in business circles, for systems theory. And I mean, maybe we should say, like, what is Theory U and what is your collaboration with Otto? Because that's a big part of your life now, right?
It is, Mark. And a great blessing, So I, was working as a dancer, and I had all for ages, for the 70s, I've had a little team of friends and collaborators in the performing arts that we make improvised performances and have forever. We've also taught, that all of us have done arts and education work. And we were all invited to join something called the Shambhala Institute for Authentic Leadership in 2020 in Nova Scotia. I'm sorry, 2002 or one, I think it started, probably 2001. And I didn't know a thing, literally a thing about that there was even a field called leadership and coaching and, embodied learning. I mean, I just had no idea. And from that experience, I met Peter Senge, who's, we know from systems thinking. And then he brought Otto. So originally it had to do with the fact that they will recognize that those of us in the performing arts know something about co-creative processes and trying to get a high value product that maybe could be applied, or maybe there would be learning in organizational and social change. Right. So I think that was originally it, and they were also interested in this combination of art and meditation and change work. And I had done, some after Dr. King was murdered. I did work on the streets with people, and I have done because I work in education and arts and education in my early years. I was in communities a lot at that time and made things in communities that didn't go into the theater, but things that communities or kids could make together. So I think the combination of art, the combination of meditation, and the fact that this could be applied to social transformation was the first click. So then I started working with Otto in 2004, basically doing what I had been teaching for years, Mark. I mean, I had been teaching this material called, like when I first met you, maybe, something called The Art of Making a True Move. And they were practices that were more about joining contemplative and movement and creative process. And they were so unpopular, I cannot tell you. Hardly anybody ever came to them for about 40 years. But this is what I did. And that's what I brought to the presencing work. And then several years later, Otto and I and others started to collaborate on making practices that were more specifically context-oriented. Like, how do you use this so in the beginning, it was about Theory U. And Theory U is basically like a creative process. That's how it identifies. And one of the reasons it's so popular, or has been so popular, is that it just says in a kind of clear and very ordinary language, ordinary like it could be understood by people working in organizations. It describes something that's very familiar, that we're all familiar with, that it would be good to sense, to listen, to pay attention, to just try to get a feel for what our context is. It would be good to take a little bit of time to reflect on that, some retreat maybe, and then new insights come in rather than a fancier version of the same old. We're looking for real, fresh, new, open, kind of innovations, which is the right side of the U. So the U is just a process.
A description of change, isn't it? Description
exactly.
of innovation. And it's sort of, on the one hand, it's like deep and profound and philosophical, but on another hand, it's sort of commonsensical. It's like, yeah, sometimes I go and I walk in the woods, or I have a bath and I relax, and then I just kind of let go of what I was trying to do, and then I feel and I sense, and then something new comes up, and then I and then I give that a go, and then if that's good, then we really go for it and we put it out there. And
that's exactly right.
It's sort of in some ways commonsensical, but we're all kind of a bit messed up with it, aren't we? Like, often people, and myself included, will rush a part of it, or will forget to do a part of it, or a business will be not taking that time out. They'll be not taking the time to sense. And if they just had an away day, they'd come up with much better ideas than trying to whip the dead horses that they've already got going,
That's exactly.
That set the stage of Theory U. And because it's one of those things that can be hard to explain, or people can get lost in the abstract language of it, but it's actually quite simple in a way, right?
It is simple. I feel that that's the case. It's very simple. The theory is simple. The practice is not so simple.
Right.
What I've recognized is what a terrible listener I am, and I don't always take the time to retreat and reflect, and I don't always prototype and learn from multiple iterations. And so it's just a continuous learning. I mean, I've been there for 15 years now, and I just feel like I learn every time I'm engaged in a process or a design, or of a course or anything. So it's it's been a very, very good kind of frame for so many people. And it includes a lot of the other methodologies, Mark. So other kinds of both embodied and dialogic methods are just included. It's whatever you bring already, you can use in the structure, and it's not like a thing, as you say. It has a much more natural flow. And I mean, Otto's an academic, and the theory U book is huge.
Guy, right?
Nobody's read the book, right? It's just huge, and so. As you say, you could say a lot of words about something that's pretty simple.
My sense is he kind of needed an artist and a meditator and someone connected to the body, because he's a super clever, heady academic. So he got you in to kind of go, okay. And he's smart enough to realize he needed to collaborate with someone who had their feet on the ground in a different way. Like, is that fair? I mean, I'm sure
he's a farmer's son, so he has that kind of embodiment. It's like
is he from
excuse me?
Is he Austrian? It sounds German.
Oh, he's German.
Yeah. Okay, so you're involved with this, and you do a process which is sort of a little bit like constellations work, if people are familiar with that, or not at all. Would you say there was similarities or not?
Some of the practices, Mark, there are 8 practices that we kind of call social presencing theater now. 4 of them are these original ones, which don't have anything to do with constellations. And then one of them is connected to something called the case clinic, which is a wonderful kind of methodology that anybody can use for peer coaching. But the one that is called 4D mapping, 4-dimensional mapping, that one is more similar to organizational constellations. We could have a long conversation about why it isn't the same. Partially about origin, that it doesn't come from a family therapy background, that it tends to emphasize this is where we are now. Of course, we got here from past circumstances, but there's a little bit more emphasis on this is where we are now and what is emerging as a future, rather than the emphasis being on how did we get here based upon historic and family dysfunction and oppression and whatnot. So that there's a little bit more emphasis on this. Okay, we acknowledge that there's been great, trauma or suffering or confusion, and that lives in the map here now. And given that, there's also freedom. There's also creativity. There's also potential. So we tend to focus on that end of that journey a little bit more. And it's more embodied, Mark, embodied in that I really want people to feel in the body a shape, not just to stand there and be a channel for something.
Right.
But shape into something. And I think the last thing is that there's no intervention. In other words, I'm making something that I want a 14-year-old high school kid to be able to do, to set up, facilitate, and do. It does not require the kind of skill that constellations does, where there's intervention, where the constellation steps in and says, do this, do that. This is what
limits the number of people that can do it. And I understand your work's done, executives, school kids. Like I've seen video of people doing it. I mean, I'm 10 years out of date with having been to a workshop. I've only been, I felt like, God, has the time passed? That was a decade on my hour. I got to a workshop. I was just talking to Daniel Ludwig though on Tuesday. I've kept in contact with, and he's guest teachers on EFC. So occasionally I sort of ask him what's going on and try and keep track. But it looks like I've only glimpsed it, so I'm aware that there's it's a fairly big body of work, isn't it?
It's gotten big. I mean, and wonderful people like Daniel are facilitating and bringing it in one way or the other into their context. So, So there are similarities, and then but most of the practices are not so similar, and they, you know, in all of the what's called these kind of ones that we've invented in the last few years with the presencing community, they all have this starting with a sculpture one. Like you start with what is the feeling quality of this present situation in this organization, in this community, and wherever the map is or the stuck is. And then using the body, the feeling of the body, you know, boycotting what we think should happen or how to, you know, manipulate this situation or whatever. Try to suspend that enough to actually feel what is it that the body actually wants to do.
Yeah.
And where in the space that we're talking about now, the relationship of bodies with one another, where does it want to go? And so, I mean, there's only a few things, right? It can go closer or further away. It can go to the edge. It can go in the center. It can get taller. It can lie down on the ground. I mean, it has levels, it has proximity, and it has direction. That's it for a body.
Can I give an example of a little one like this I did in my company years ago?
Of course, yeah.
Like there's like 8 of us working with the company, and we're in a certain grouping, and we just kind of intuitively went, where should I stand? And some people were like very close to me as the leader, and some people had their back turned or were facing towards us. And then we're like, okay, what needs to happen here? And just intuitively, some people went closer, some people went further, you know, and it became very useful as an intuition. And then there was a rightness to it, and we went, oh yeah, Mark's keeping that person too close, or you know what, maybe this person shouldn't be working with us now, they've got other dreams, you know. And it was just very like I felt like we saved hours of conversation.
That's exactly right.
Like 10 minutes of standing around a room feeling a bit awkward, and then going, okay, no, because I think you don't have to be like super intuitive or sensitive to go, this feels more right than that.
That's right.
You know that's like facing this with.
That's a great description. I don't think we need to be superpowers. I think all of us have a feel for it. And I also think that it saves incredible amount of time, which is Otto's thing, is that it just is much faster than sitting around trying to talk about this for the 1,000th time. That to get people up and just moving in the space, there's so much information around their patterns and their kind of what they're holding back on and what they aspire to. I mean, it just all shows up. And because people, I'm sure you found the same thing, are in a little bit of a vulnerable position. So they don't, you know, they're not experts at this. And therefore, this kind of, you know, more curious, more open, more, you know, just slightly more off guard. And therefore, their own intelligence comes out more somehow, and their own, you know, trust of the situation. If you can get a safe enough environment, which I'm sure you can set up in your situations, then I think it can be very powerful. And I can't tell you exactly why it works, but I mean, the insights people have, and the reflections, and it is a reflection tool, Mark. It's not a problem-solving method.
Yeah, it doesn't say like, well, this is definitely happening and we should find.
No. It's just a matter of deepening the reflection.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting. So I remember going to your workshops, and back then I was, you know, more, I'd say more linear, slightly more closed to certain things. And I remember being, on the one hand, going, wow, there's something definitely happening here, but not quite knowing why or how. And almost frustrated or going, is this a bit woo-woo? But it doesn't feel like your vibe. You're not like New Age or anything. And I kind of left going, wow, I'm not sure if that was the most deep genius embodied work I've ever seen, or whether it was sort of just some abstract thing. Maybe I wasn't ready for it at the time, but it's still a fear in me about something like, and I've seen this more with constellations than your work, like people can project a lot into constellations, you know.
Oh gosh, yes.
Element, you know, I've seen some things in that weren't too, you know, when I've done constellation stuff, and I've gone, or they'd have a very strong theory about the field that felt very woo-woo to me, and I go, well, I'm not sure if that's the happening. I'm kind of, what would be the word? I'm not atheist about it. I'm more like agnostic about it, you know.
Yes, I understand. I think, you know, it's an interest. I mean, obviously, with theory U, there's also this. It's a field theory, so there is a sense of something called a social field, and that social fields can be generative, as we said earlier, or they can be really, stuck. They can be highly conceptual. They can be conflictive. They can be woo-woo, as you say. So what is a really sane, grounded social fabric that we need to build on the planet, right? We need this in our organizations, in our communities. And I think that's one of our inquiries, and that you need to bring the body in the conversation. It can't be just mental and verbal, because the body, obviously, as you know, probably better than I, is this incredible sensing mechanism. So it does pick up information that is trustworthy through sense perceptions and through a kind of felt sense, to use Eugene Genlin's word, a feeling quality of something. And I think it's an underutilized resource. This kind of you used the word before, intuition. Maybe that's it. I'm not sure what intuition is, but it's that. I think it's in that ballpark of being a feeling sense. I'm aware of something here that is either a sense that it's opening up into something that has potential and creativity, or it's like stuck in some kind of closed system. Like I'm closing down, they're closing down. The whole thing seems like it's not, that it has some kind of obstruction. And that happens all the time, right? We sense a whole variety of things. But we're saying that if you could stay with that feeling, whatever it is, and not like freak out or fight back or, go through all the things that we always do, that there's the natural sense that, nobody wants to have a miserable life, and nobody wants the entire planet to get destroyed, or nobody wants a terrible school system for their kids. I mean, maybe there are people like this, but I've never met any. So there's a longing or care that we all have, that we want our work and our presence to contribute to something in our lifetime that's positive. But oftentimes we don't have the channels, or we don't quite know how that works, or how we set it up for other people, in our family or in our teams, So I think our work is, how do you get the body knows stuff, the sense of embodiment is so important, not just because we need to be grounded and not just completely lost in thought, but also it's also because it has heartfeltness to it, and
Quick interruption to tell you about my book, Embodiment. Creatively named, hey? Actually, Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness. You can find this online at theembodimentbook.com. That's theembodimentbook.com. So this book is an introduction to the whole field. If you like these interviews, you'll probably love this book. Funny stuff, poems, personal stories from my life, illustrating what embodiment's all about, and loads for professionals in the field too. Top teaching tips, language tips, that kind of thing. Yeah, a real condensation of everything I've learned about embodiment, basically. So you can get pre-orders at Amazon.com, and if you just put in Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness, that's the name of the book, or go to theembodimentbook.com. On there, you'll see quotes from various teachers, a bunch of fun illustrations, and you can also get the first chapter completely free online at theembodimentbook.com. Enjoy, and back to the interview.
Yeah, so
there's clearly wisdom there that opens up, and it can enable us to it almost feels like getting unstuck, because as you say, people are good people, they want the best, no one wants to be miserable or to be part of this destruction and chaos, but then it's like we get stuck, and there's something about relaxing, tuning in, that enables like a natural process to unfold, and all of a sudden it becomes, I've seen this in groups, all of a sudden everyone drops in and it becomes easy, and then the next big move for the company or for the group or whoever just becomes the easiest thing.
Right. I think that's what we're talking about, a kind of attending. It's not like it's careless, but it has to do with this sense of relaxing a little bit, letting our our edges kind of soften a little, and that quality, which sometimes takes a little bravery or takes a little generosity or something, but that quality then is a fertile ground, or as we would say, a field, a social field for, sort of something more creative or more beneficial to emerge. I think that's the heart of the work in a way.
Yeah.
And we've seen it happen, and it can happen by chance or happen even though we don't know what we're doing.
Can you give us an example of a group you've worked with? I'd love to hear like a company or a social group you're working with, or an NGO. I'd love to hear, one that's not private. I'd love to hear a kind of an example. I'm stretching here. I mean, I hurt myself a little bit lifting heavy weights this morning, not listening to my body enough. So you see me stretching. That's what's happening.
Fine. Let's see. I think for the first thing is I'm not a consultant, and so I do very little work in companies. Occasionally I do, but it's always with another consultant. But where I have worked mostly is in schools, as I said, K through 12 in education, and also I've worked in the disabilities community, people with developmental disabilities, and the agencies, both private and government, that provide a service for those for that population. And interestingly enough, some of the early work that we did had to do with these little performances, making performances that then triggered conversations. And we did several of these in New York, both in New York City and in the state of New York with this population, which was really it was powerful in that. So the event is that this is, let's say, all the agencies in New York City that work with this, and they're very discouraged about government thing, about regulations, about all sorts of stuff that's oppressive about that system. It's a difficult system. In New York, it's particularly difficult. And I work with a fantastic woman there, Beth Mount, who is just so much care for this community. So in this example, for instance, they're sitting at tables, I can't remember, 150 people or something. And then we have the people with disabilities and their support workers. These are young people from about 18 to 25, and their support workers are about the same age. And we've worked with them for several months to make a little performance around what works for them, which was green. It was indicated by green, go signs and things growing, and what didn't work for them, which was indicated by stop signs and red tape and whatnot. And so we made with them a little performance that was performed at the beginning of this little conference or gathering of the agencies. And then a person with disabilities was in each group. Now, they don't always be able to stay in each group, but they'd never been invited into the agency meetings. And then with the people, we gave them the same thing, red and green. What is really growing? Like, what is emerging? Is it a little seed of an idea? Is it a little project? Is it a bigger project? And we gave them little stop signs, like what wasn't working and what was the obstruction. And they put these, so they all said, it's so messed up and nothing good is happening and whatever. But when it happened that we have a little performance that triggers this kind of emotional opening for everybody. It's a beautiful, beautiful performance that they gave, and a wonderful heart from the support workers. And it set a kind of tone in the room so that the grousing and was sort of, they remembered why they were in this line of work, and kind of, there was this opening in the space. Then they had a series of facilitated conversations. And after that, we asked them to put up their green growing things and their stop signs, And so they hung them on a clothesline, what they'd made. And the interesting thing is this incredible, the system saw itself as being like full of potential. There were so many more green things than stop signs. And they couldn't believe it. They said, no, that can't be right. It's full of stop signs. No, there's something's wrong here. And yet that's what happened, is that they started to acknowledge all the great things that were happening. And that, again, shifted again once they could see collectively what was happening. So it's like that kind of, in that case, we're using the movement at the beginning. In the school systems, and we worked in South Central Los Angeles in such a difficult school. Like maybe you've seen the video on this, but that's another one where the kids, this level of suffering of these kids, high school kids, around whether they're going to be deported, on language, on a just academic, on school violence, on home violence, on poverty. It's just they're the worst victims of social school educational breakdown and social breakdown. And yet working with them in movement and them each doing their little stuck practices in groups. And we've been working with little Polaroids so that they can take pictures of their stucks and make their postcards. I mean, it shifted, it shifts the quality of the space in such a profound way. And it certainly doesn't shift a school system. You go in there with big ideas how you're going to make a systems transformation, and that is not what happened. But within these few kids and teachers and that principle, it moves something into a more positive situation. So I don't know if that was exactly the kind of example.
No, it's beautiful. It's really nice to hear. I enjoy hearing that. And I'm struck by a few things there. Like, one at the end, I had a feeling in my own body, which is like, so it doesn't change the school system. And sometimes we have these tools and we're working, quite skillfully, whether it's me using Paul Linden's work or you using this, or, some people with Wendy Palmer or Strozzi, doing really skillful work. And then, but we're still with the systems we have. You know what I mean? We're up against the systems we have. And after, even in the sort of 12 years I've been running a company, I met you fairly early in my full-time professional career. Things in some ways have got worse in organizations. Many organizations, governments, or, whether it's the British National Health Service being underfunded or, whatever it is. And I can be in there doing a workshop, but then we're still up against these kind of bigger systems. And I'm not sure, do we just keep doing what we do because this is how we can contribute and it's the only thing we know? Or, how does that sit?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Mark. I mean, I do know that we just keep continuing. And also, I think maybe there are, as we keep working, there are larger opportunities. Like President Singh now is working with the UN on implementing the SDGs in a couple of countries and the Sustainable Development Goals. And maybe there are opportunities for all of us that can lead into, larger scale projects. But I also, we just need to be, I suppose, grateful for the fact that we are invited into the situations that we are in. It led me, Mark, to asking you over these, let's say, the 15 years or 10 years that you've been doing this, what kind of changes do you notice in terms of the willingness of people to engage in embodiment practices? I'm so appreciative of Wendy's work. I don't see Wendy now on a regular basis, Wendy Palmer, but I've taken her workshops, a workshop with her, and I so appreciate what she does. I know that you work with so many other people that are in your network, and so it is easier. I notice this also.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge also the point of view of just being grateful to actually do the work. For me, there's a gratitude any group I'm invited into, and the gratitude to do the work that I love, and that I think even in some small way makes a difference. I think that's important. Somehow for me, I don't have the luxury of anger or resentment or despair. That's not a luxury I'm willing to buy. The price is not worth the payoff. And it's definitely getting easier. And definitely, I sometimes say, to my students, like, hey guys, you're inheriting an easier world here, because I think particularly mindfulness has made the difference, like the mindfulness revolution. And, I just wrote a book on embodiment, and it's entitled Beyond Mindfulness. I almost called it Mindfulness 2.0, because I feel like the world becomes ready for embodiment once the idea of mindfulness is there. And even if it's just via an app and it's relatively shallow, people have some sense that being present is important. And they might not understand the depths of that you could reach in social presence in theatre, but you kind of get, okay, paying attention is a good thing, even if they haven't been to a Zen temple,
Yes, I agree.
Getting easier. That's the good news.
Yeah, and also the meditation, once the word, we have a lot of indebtedness to John Kabat-Zinn, because once he was able to bring the research around pain management and stress reduction, and so he took it out of this Asian religious background, and so it became something that at least people had heard the word and were curious, So I do think, even though some of us got into meditation through movement the other way, I do think there is a relationship. And when I first started bringing meditation, which we called awareness practice, into the programs of Presencing and of Peter Senge's programs, oh gosh, sometimes we have a few people come, and then the attrition was terrific, so that, you'd end up with 4 people in the room. But now everybody comes. I mean,
yeah. I've seen my students. Everyone's a meditator amongst life coaches and yoga teachers now, and even more, more people in business. It used to be maybe one HR manager secretly did a bit of yoga or something, and now it's like half the room does yoga, and 3 of them meditate regularly, and 10 of them have a mindfulness app they once used, the Headspace app or something. So it's definitely there's less cynicism there. The door's opening, and mindfulness has enabled people to say, instead of calling it a conscious dance practice, they say, oh, it's mindful movement. That people are using that term. It's a modern approach to this, and adding the movement piece in. So I see that getting easier, and I don't know. I kind of want to feel as this is your expertise. I really want to feel into where's this all going with you? We were just talking about this a little bit before we press record, weren't we? I've got all these links, and through the podcast and the conference, the next conference next year is going to be even bigger than the last one.
Yeah, fantastic.
And that feels like a great way for me to get it out there. But I'm also one way to do that would be from my ego, right? I want to do this thing to the world. I want to make this thing, and it's going to be this big, and blah, 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 get these big speakers and make this much money, But another way is kind of actually to go, okay, what wants to happen here? What wants to happen in the future of this work? And can I lubricate that? Can I be a part of that? Can I ease that along? Can I unstuck something in that? So yeah, I'm very curious about the future of embodied work and where it's going and what might want to happen.
Yeah, I think those 2 questions are very good ones. That I don't know. I think maybe there's feedback around that question about whether I'm just trying to make. We know that you want to do something beneficial, so that's not the question. And then your question has to do with how much of it is some kind of self-aggrandizement of trying to scale what you're already doing. And the other question has to do with how to listen into what would be the most supportive for the community of both practitioners of embodiment, but also of, a client, let's say, population. It seems like the important thing is you ask the question, and one of the things that popped into my mind is that what I notice is that I have incredibly great colleagues. I mean, the people that I'm working with now, the level of Daniel Ludovic, for instance, is a great example. It's just a wonderful, wonderful person, and a fantastic consultant, and a very, embodied, can bring it in such a light and intelligent. I mean, such an intelligent person, in terms of how he can integrate things together. And I'm working with a young researcher, so that I'm going to move into the future part here in a minute here, because what we are interested in is a little bit has been research. And let's say the example of Dr. Kabat-Zinn, the validity of meditation, meditation and mindfulness and awareness have been like helpful to people for a long time, like thousands of years. And yet somehow people needed to see data that it changed the brain and that, whatever. They need to see this kind of research in order for most people to think it's works. Although, like, that's, on some level, that's ridiculous. But on the other level, that's what it is that science is interested in the neurobiology and neuroscience. And that has made this legitimate for some people who believe that kind of thing. So I think this is an embodiment right now with our work. We're trying to do some research, not only on impact of the social presencing theater as a methodology, but also on using social presencing theater as a research tool in itself to look at, again, social fields, to measure social field shift, to investigate what is a social field, what are we talking about here, a generative social field. So this work now is developed. There's quite a team of people quite a team. I mean, it's small, like 20 people in the SPT community who are really investigating this and trying to listen in and trying to write things about it. So I think that's one way. We don't have or at least in social presencing theater, we don't have the facility of doing conferences and things that on the scale that you do. You're working with people. But just in a small scale, we are interested in this idea of research and being able to understand what it is. Like, I thought earlier what you said, like, is something profound happening here, or is this highly conceptual, or what's happening here? That we have no idea what's happening here. I mean, we can set some up. People say these insights, this happened to me, this was life-changing, this was so profound. But speaking of Dr. Kabat-Zinn, recently in Los Angeles, he was in a conference that we attended, and we did a little social presencing theater around this fantastic work of a young man named Angel Acosta, who did a presentation on 400 years of slavery. We were talking about the United States. And then we did a little social presencing theater. I mean, this is a conference with 180, 200 people in it who've never heard of social presencing theater. So we have to get them up and on their feet and in groups and doing something. But later at dinner, Dr. Kabat-Zinn said, how does that work, that you put 3 or 4 strangers together for a few minutes to do some embodiment and to talk to each other about their experience, and suddenly you just love them? So how does that work? He said, I just love these 3 guys I worked with.
Yeah.
And that happened in like a 10-minute period, right? How does that work? So it was.
It's hard to say I don't know, right? It's like, especially when we're in the business of this, there's an element of mystery to embodiment. And no one wants to say they don't know. Politicians can't say it. Like we've got Brexit going on right now. Everyone's like, what's going to happen? No one wants to say I don't know. No, that's the truth. Nobody knows. Good, bad, probably bad, but who knows, right? Like who knows? Like, no one wants to say I don't know, and it's a tricky thing to say.
We just recently, not that long ago, did mapping on Brexit. So
okay. I'm not sure I want to know.
Oftentimes with our maps, we have another version of stuck. Like, people are more stuck than they actually think they're stuck.
Sure.
So we feel that that's progress, but not certain every client.
Well, my wife's Ukrainian, and the joke is we're going to have to go live in the Ukraine to escape British poverty. So that's the joke. That I married her for her visa. So it's
oh goodness,
because we get prejudice the other way around. You see, so it's kind of like become fun for us since Brexit. But okay, so. Yeah, future of this work, future of embodiment, not knowing. There's something humbling about this work, isn't there? There's something humbling about kind of stepping into that I don't know space.
Definitely humbling. And sometimes we say not knowing is what we call intelligence. that let's say if we're just using social presencing theater, and I explained that it starts with a kind of sculpture 1, which where we set up the current situation, and then it moves in this kind of contemplative way to a sculpture 2. And the important part is that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where it's going. And I often say that it's so much easier for me to work with people that are not dancers,
Right.
not theater people. They have no training. They're very self-conscious about what they're doing because it's new and they have no frame of reference for what is supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But that quality of not knowing and feeling slightly awkward is so beautiful, right? It's such a powerful place to work from, and you can't manufacture that. It's you can't manufacture that kind of not knowing, self-conscious, slightly awkward, not having your thing together, and it's out of that space that people do these beautiful, genuine, powerful gestures.
Yeah, I want to say I know exactly what you mean, but that would be ironic. But it's funny whenever you talk. I find that whenever I teach or talk about this subject, people I see all the experienced coaches in the room saying, "I know exactly what you mean," and that's exactly the point. And just a little bit, I want to bring in the audience a little bit here. So we got yoga teachers, dance teachers, coaches out listening to this. And my experience is you can bring some of this stuff in a small way, right? Like running a yoga class and just being, you know what, do I want to arrange the mats a bit differently today? Or, okay, what wants to happen in this class? Do I want to speed it? Even though I've got a plan, I come into every interview with a plan of I'm going to go, I've done my research, I'm going to ask Arawana about this, this, and this. But then there's also the feeling into okay, what wants to happen? What do we want to talk about? Where's the flow going here? That's something a yoga teacher can bring in, or a martial arts teacher, right? They don't have to go full social presencing theater training before they can do any of this.
Oh yeah, I think that some of the basic, let's say, principles, or if that's not a kind of a heavy-handed word, but view, would be very resonant with all sorts of other disciplines. In that, this sense of being present to the feeling of the body, this moment, is such an important kind of beginning place. And in practices like yoga, where the forms are traditional and set, and there's a kind of a more or less a correct way of doing them and not. Even within that kind of structure, there's so much openness and kind of, how it's offered, how a teacher offers it, and makes such a difference in terms of the quality of gentleness but the quality of precision. And so these kinds of basic principles of non-manipulation, non-aggression, not trying to make something happen, not trying to connect, but saying that we're already connected, just notice that. Basic things like that work through the forms of social presencing theater. I'm sure are true with so many of us who work in movement. I think one of the things that, the name is social presencing. So presencing is a made-up word that is a combination of presence and sensing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then social means that it's with others. So there are practices, I don't know if you remember the 20-minute dance, but there are embodied, synchronizing mind and body practices. But primarily the practices are in small groups, in teams. There's one duet, and sort of nonverbal conversation practice. But most of them are in small teams. And the social quality of it is maybe something that isn't necessarily true in all movement training, where you're working with individual body-mind synchronization. In this time, again, it's a collective, it's a group, it's a social field, if we get back to that word. And the social
Full circle, aren't we, to a little bit about at the beginning about social, and rather than this individualistic model of embodiment, which is like, okay, I am doing my centering or my yoga or whatever, like just bring into a little bit. And I see circling really bring this in. A lot of kind of young people doing this relational meditation is quite fashionable now. And I see that coming in, and that is there's a way that can be incorporated into other practices.
Yeah. So I noticed it also, friends in our community doing something called social meditation. And it really has to do with us expanding awareness out. Sometimes we say that a map, let's say, or like a little team, it has its own kind of beingness, and the being is different than each individual, like in the parts, right?
Yeah.
You would say in dance, didn't you hear this in 1,000 years ago? The dance is different than the dancers, or something like that. I can't remember what the expression
I've never heard that one before, actually, but I've never heard that one, but it makes sense. There's an emergent property to a group which
that's right.
is not the same as the individuals, and
yeah, that's it.
that is a thing.
And sometimes it's got its own being. And as you said earlier in the conversation, that can be quite, scary and destructive, crowd pushing and things like that. Or it can be quite, beneficial and, a collective and creative, as we know with certainly the performing arts. So I think, we're in that, certainly in that territory of exploration.
It's kind of coming to the other side of our U here now, and it's been pleasant and gentle, and I knew it would be a nice time with you today. It always is. So it's people can't see this, but Arawana has a sort of radiance to her, which is very sort of soft and pleasant to be around. So even by online, it's very nice. And anything that you feel very passionate about right now that you haven't spoken about that would be something you'd love to put out before we close?
Maybe. I've been thinking about our work in relationship to climate, which I think is just such an overwhelming, we all have to be thinking about this and working in this area in some way. It's not my area of expertise. I mean, as I said, I mostly work in education and social change, but I'm beginning to think more about how our work can contribute. Our body and the earth body have this, our body is made up of earth body, and the well-being of the planet body is, of course, completely related to our body as well as our social body. So I think I'm thinking of that more, how we can focus our attention. That might be an interesting thing for the conference, to have people speak to their work in relationship to.
We've got a whole thread on the environment and another one on social change. And I think the environmental one will be full of stuff on climate change and be, very juicy around that. That's
great.
Yeah. We've got one track on peace and social change and one track on the environmental issues. So, I mean, that's great. That's 200 speakers, 100.
That's perfect.
Quite a chunk of what we're doing. We didn't just want to have it sidelined. We wanted to give those two areas kind of some weighty kind of time, and we've got some good speakers already lined up and open to more. Please don't apply yet. People out there that have been emailing me, will open applications in January. There'll be a fair process. You, of course, will be invited back as a past speaker. So if you haven't got the formal invitation from Daniela yet, you will in the very near future. So we'll be inviting most of the speakers back from last time and then adding a whole bunch more. But well, this has been fun. Like in terms of, no, fun's not the right word. This has been pleasant, lovely, deep, present. There we go. So where can people find out more if they want to kind of delve into this a little bit more?
So either my website or the Presencing website. So mine is just my name, which is simple enough.
Let's spell that, because it's Arawana, spelled
sure.
AWAN for November, Hayashi, HAY like hay, Ashi like the beer, ASHI, Arawana Hayashi.
That's right. Or presencing.org.
Presencing.org. There we go. And as normal, people listening on the website, I'll have those links if you didn't catch either of those. And I know on presencing.org there's quite a lot of kind of cool resources and stuff up there as well, isn't there?
That's right. There's a lot there. And both websites, if you were to enroll in the U Lab, which is the online free massive open online course of Presencing Institute, it also has open source the video and instructions on some of the practices. So that's all open source material through Presencing Institute or through my website. They're just on the site, and people can look, and if they're useful, they're offered.
You have a final message about the body for listeners to close?
Oh, just don't forget it.
You know what? I have to rewrite my whole book on embodiment I've just wrote and just put that one line in instead of 150 pages. Just don't forget it. There we go. Job done. Book over. Send it to publishers. Arawana, that's a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. I will really appreciate connecting with you.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If you're, most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.